For those of you here in the room and for those of you following online, welcome to this afternoon's Sophia this afternoon, and Ananiadou, HR digital before tech seminar. I say a university. So when it comes to the question, a few things and what questions you're asking. After Sophia, if you all about Sophia's talk, Sophia just generally speaking, first of all, we are screening this live, so we are one of the key areas. She's joining us for research and the over application of text mining.
So for premises as well.
Pass over to you now.
Thank you. So I really,
Sophia.
First of all, thank you very much. That some of you give you some perhaps half of you might don't know anything about it. By actually a demo of a prototype system for this archives. So the outline is basically, as I said, what is text mining, very briefly, what's the whole process, what we had to do in order to text mine the historical, medical, historical archives, annotation, and by this is basically, if you just look at the text, perhaps enriching the document as raw text, semantic, other data. So an important part, those OCR correction was one, depending if you have we call it a time-sensitive term inventory for the historical archives. And by that is if you have to create a search system, it's very important to expand your query. If you don't know how people talk about tuberculosis in the past, you won't be able to suggest those terms. And I'll conclude by showing you the prototype search system. Tells you what it's all about. But so a bit simplified. This is actually so yeah, the whole kind of this is the idea is you start with from any archive with, and this is a structure. So there is a text mining text, all data creates. You put a pipeline of tools, of technical tools, text mining tools. You have a typical sentence there. Quickly, they have to tokenize the text. You have so you have annotations. You find the syntax and the semantics. The whole process, of course, happens automatically. There's nobody's doing it manually. But you need to put the pipeline together. You need to have the infrastructure together, put together, develop tools to do that. Using different infrastructures to basically take completely raw text and rendering it to a structured text. So text, and based on the mining text and structured data, and set systems, you can make them structure to find association, some this whatever you like. Sentence. So very well. And you can say, I will say here, leave the pain was seated in the for me. Okay. The pillars of the diagram. So you see here. So change. You find here under actually the display and anatomical and here sign and symptom. This sentence actually it's a good example of what text mining does. So so semantic type the input that automatically as it is like a symptom sum with tiny semantic type to treatment word. Okay, all that is a person's supports basically can be used search semantic search, but to mark up the text. Also improve. So we call you need to have this type of tool information access, which are actually so if you have to do the semantic any documents analysis. It relates very difficult to understand, but also as you notice before and find out between those, or you don't know what only affects as we have entities, mark up entity here. To do a bit more assignment of relation historical archives. So the system automatically extracts this type of information from text, deeper semantics. And you can do even more. You can also and once you enrich text content in this way, then you can do all sorts of things from search to question answering to sentiment analysis, and in this case, historical analysis to trends of medicine, to do analysis and so on. So just there. So there is a kind of a support a bit about our historians of medicine, researchers, but we're providing the collaboration. So they had specific before we've been tools. DISC, EPSRC, specific needs of what tool services more than 10 years in existence. Resources for a variety of distance, the of users. And it has been we are of course agnostic different decades, according to how historically this was important, and this will rely on our collaborators. So, and this is where text mining comes. We use the different tools, resources as well, and infrastructure. So the aim was to mine text, as I said, text mine text is, and one of the how first clean or how is which are inserted due to digitization of text is for some are then the text mining archives. This depends, of course, on text mining tools. So if you have PMJ archive and the archives have been propagated, so you can consume and costly. So solutions for that basically, although initially we did improvement whole project designing, then the phone, and we had to automate the semantic end. So we had to definitely add diseases and so on. The semantics specified by the users and ethical information. I have to say that this, and I will let you know, different users have different needs, entities and the events, so they're not necessarily set in stone. You can develop new entities, but in this case, our users were very for search. Again, it's very important to look at the terminological variation to allow how was to support our terms change over time as search. So we had to create. So this has different parts automatically. A term semantic parts. The first part is a search system, which is to you suggest. I will show you. Allow the user to automate the automatically build a query. Prototype looks like, and basically items, which perhaps as you can start, perhaps the student items doesn't be as known to the user. So if you have it to your query, how so that you need to be able to find and if you put a query in a normal student, the history of medicine, you retrieve documents. Different ways of doing that, and some people automatically. So this is an automatic method, but we're using what we call a supervised method in our field. The supervisors, we still need to have a small gold standard. So we wanted to, but you can do this in a supervised as well, supervised way. But and we chose to have, in this case we create select it very by our core gold historians, And this is the for X and the gold standard is a sub-manually annotated, so we from MOH. Of documents which have had 2-3 people manually. Overall, over 70,000 words. Interesting because different words, but the events were happening. How we capture. The interesting thing is 85, and the very quick terminological change, also classified in these 90s, 20s, time consuming for our project also lasted 15 months. So there are different spelling checkers around, and we chose the open source spelling checker, the handspell, which is perhaps very real for human use. So handspell produces a ranked list of spelling corrections, but as I said, it's tailored for human to be and for general support that we document is not for invented the handspell dictionary in history of medicine with the open med dictionary, which is for medical. And then, as I said, we did overrides. And we write some the default spell. We used also the case and adding another more medical dictionary, we corrected the approach. So this is to give you a sample of the corrections. So this is an example from 1840. The ones which are in red are actually, in red, the errors. Okay, so if errors, if you don't correct that, then exactly how BMJ looked like. So we had to deal with the text. So here is basically basically the correct. This is a word basically just made by handspell, and this is by using the correct change. Frequency-driven handspell values, and those are you have correct using still OCR error only using not detected by both the original and frequency. The frequency much intelligent with those given methods, at least, and as I said, from different decay of your corpus, still some errors. Use one without actually from the basic answer. If you issues you don't the frequency driven, you have spell, you have some corrected, you don't want to have, but basically if you add the overcorrection, you match basically because it's a evaluation the original. So this is, as I said, this was basically what you want to have. A necessary step we had to do to obtain. So then we had to clean material, create. The next step with our colleagues, as I said, to do the leaks from gold standard, which I had. Of course, the reasoning one Manchester the night before. To prevent to have a condition, and here you see humidity, milk, linen drains. So these are actually they have sign and symptom. The symptom: cough, pain, rise in temperature, swollen. Subject: If this is the entity, so now you see that on the basis of this kind of annotation, your search is basically you're doing a search based on semantic time. Your search a bit wider. What are the conditions? What's the environment? Then, as you'll see in the next part was a bit more difficult because we had to find, when I talk about events, complex interactions linking those entities. I'll give you an example here. Too, but I was like without the notes, but both of us.
Oh, I see. I don't know.
Because I want to see the full screen too. Otherwise I cannot see it. So apologies. I had the impression you were looking at full screen. So right, hopefully I'll see it now. Another example is, okay, it's good. So it's like the patient did well with the another entity. So you have the part actually transforms. So it's more general questions, and then you see all the verbs which are being realized here. Tuberculosis another thesis in the subject case. So as you can see, you have the whole text, all this collect is transformed in with semantic connotations of entities and events. your search now, we're in the beginning of my second search into slides and said questions, what affects, just doing a keyword condition, what that search, we all know that you have, so it's a different, it's not, which to my many results, which I'm not, perhaps skip it, it's so pertinent, this automatically. So once you have, so the gold standard, and you know what you want to do, then we use machine learning. We train them on the gold standard based to actually use also dictionaries to obtain more specific information. In this case, we use the classifiers and thesaurus and the meta extract the mouse entities. The meta map is different types of name and entity system training, with basically taking into account different morphological and for the UMLS features of the entities and their context. So the next part we did concepts which we use also is to show how we could map the concepts from our corpus performance, even basically base performance, 80% is like F score. It's the average between precision and recall. Some entities, they were a bit difficult. Actually, some of them, they're not so very to produce and annotate, difficult even for corpus. We have two, the annotators, 3 people to agree. Too much of a disagreement. Marking, obviously, text annotation, so parts. So we need investigation. Guidelines are not so good to have. So we have agreement between. If we have some good agreement, is other performance using more semantic information, lower than the precision. Said what is recognized is actually accurate. That's important. However, but some entities may be hard to improve this. Entity recognizer, which has the facility to just hook into dictionaries and improve the performance. So this, and the next part, putting event part is basically, so we start doing more interesting things. You know, you find the participants of an event. An event is like causality. You have in the sentence origin, subject, the result, and the cause. For this, we have already tools in house which actually automatically extract events from different types, biology, from medicine, of testing, from new, from not only, so it can be adapt this collective action, but from to different domains. So we're archives, building existing. So the complex task overall. So we had marked up about 600 affect and 200 causality events. And very often is one of the difficulties was that the different types of triggers in an event, which could be challenging. So although we actually it's a very good result for the amount of time, we still carry on the work, although the project is finishing officially in 10 days time. We are planning to expand on the corpus to just cater for more events on basically on this case. So now a small, a tiny sort of diversion to tell you about, and I want to talk about how we can interpret it. So interpretation, something is negated, or if it's, for instance, certain. And so once you identify events, something like causality or inhibition or whatever, then you want to take the sentence and say they're not all the same. They might have a complete different perspective. So I'll show you something we have done for EuroPubMed Central, which is actually funded by Wellcome. And we call it the Evidence Finder. And this is actually massive because it works on about 2.5 million full papers. But I'll just show you how it's a different system talking about the interpretation. To user asks a query, basically Alzheimer's disease. The system extracts, suggests questions. It's not like autocomplete, it's not Google search. Basically, parse the text with an annotated text, and then we know that if I say Alzheimer's, there's specific types of interactions and associations which would be of relevance. So we just, and here you would have extracts, snippets from the whole documents, which are automatically recommended to the user. So if you, for instance, you look at the questions, if the question is of answers, so if you go through 2.5 million sort of types of data, it's a more understanding what you're looking for. Diverting to that is because I want to show you something else. And this is the interpretation of events. So what we honor is discourse context of proteins are not the meta-motivated by IL. If you look at slide or ARC, suggest that B21 proteins are strongly active, but then you say show that are weakly activated. Same, this is in text, the occurring text, Medline, PubMed. So there's the same sentences with the same, basically the same entities. They're interpreted in a completely different way. So what we trying to find out for, and this is actually what we're trying to figure out is, are they strongly, are they weak? Do you actually suggest, because you have a speculation certain, and or is an observation? Is it a negation? So we did that for EuroPubMed Central, and if you, as you can see here, you can actually have a question generated automatically. You can choose if you find sentences which are negated or uncertain. So it's a different way of classification, of automatic classification of sentences. So you have to look at this as a search system which allows you to look at different types of interpretations. Okay. Now we didn't have the time to do that for this project, but we're going to do it anyway. So after the project finishes, we're going to add this kind of discourse. So we plan to enrich the collections in this way. Now I'm going to before I go to the demo, to the last part of my talk, which is the terminological inventory. And as I said in the beginning, the concepts, especially in historical data, they can be expressed in various, they change over time, we all know that. They also have a semantic shift that might mean something completely different. They sometimes are obsolete, they're not used anymore, but nevertheless, if you're having a search system in a historical archive, you need to be able to capture all that. These are some examples. So to address, oops. Wow. This is not what we want to see. There you are. Good. So in order to address this issue, we built what we call a time-sensitive terminological resource automatically. And the question might, somebody might ask, why not using existing resources? And the obvious thing is that existing, they might not contain historically relevant text. And often the resources, if they're not built automatically and constantly updated, the moment they're constructed, they're not pertinent anymore. So you need to take into account that very often mesh are more contemporary, or they might not be updated. And very often historically relevant terms, they're not represented in a. For this one, to give you an example, the term variation of DMJ between thesis and tuberculosis, you can see the usage and of tuberculosis in one of our well-known historical, basically relevant synonyms, which is thesis. And tuberculosis was basically little used until after the latter part of the 19th century, but thesis was much more popular until the end of the 19th century. So this is something we have in the system automatically. You can capture the changes. And another example is scarlet fever and scarlatina. Again, you have different types of usage patterns for both terms. So basically, the point here is that if one fails to take scarlatina into account as a synonym of scarlet fever, you pick up half of the documents out. You will not be able to retrieve the documents which are relevant to your query during this, this period. So what we did for that, we constructed the time-sensitive memory from not only from BMJ, but also from the MOH archives. So it's basically, we used also historical lexica to do that. So we compared existing historical data, dictionaries, and then we extracted term variants from this 19th century lexica. And then we looked at the corpus as well to find other term variants doing an analysis which we call distributional semantics, but perhaps this is not so important. So this is the historical lexical we use. One is the nomenclature of diseases and the index of diseases and their symptoms. So it's about 1872 and 1882. So each, for instance, of these resources also had, was accompanied by OCR text. And this is how basic. You have a synonym set who contains several variants of each disease concept, the English main term to the Latin term, to synonyms and different for English and Latin terms. So what we did then is basically, it's important to have, as I said in the beginning of my talk, we always use ontologies and dictionaries because we learn from them. But then the important part is you have automatically you're creating classifiers, you learn from the dictionaries, and then you're applying to the full corpus. So we process basically them, we linked the different synonyms to UML, different methods, which perhaps I should skip. And then if you look only at dictionaries, you will not be able to understand, to cover the real variability in medical texts. So to do that, we pre-processed, so just to give you a bit more technical background on that, we have to pre-process the variants. We use different methods we call distributional similarity to detect these technical terms. So maybe that's a bit, so here if you see the panel here, is a pipeline. You remember in the beginning, I was talking about text mining, text unstructured text. makes it structured, but use a pipeline of methods. And this is an example line. So the pipeline has a reader. A reader is basically how we're reading of a BMJ, how we're taking the whole archive and we are about to analyze it. Then we have different sentence splitters, taggers. It doesn't matter. It's basically a component, a set of text mining components. Now, the reason you see it in this type of panel as a pipeline is because we have developed an infrastructure to do that. So rather than thinking about or make our life difficult, our infrastructure allows us to take those tools, and if you see them as Lego components, we put them together, we create a workflow, and that's a workflow using our infrastructure to do, for instance, search or to identify entities. In this case, our workflow identifies named entities and NER suite. And you can use dictionaries, you can add dictionaries as well, you can use different machine learners and so on. So we combine two recognizers. All those dictionaries historical. We always use existing dictionaries for our work because it's very valuable information. And then the machine training learning. So now I want to explain very briefly that how we were able to say that, to identify that scarlet fever and scarlatina are basically closely associated automatically. So we used what we call distribution similarity, and the whole idea of that is if you're looking at a word like scarlet fever, but scarlet fever has a context. It occurs with other words. I mean, all the words, they're not hanging around on their own. They're having friends. Actually, Firth said you should know a word by the company it keeps. And that's very important because in different domain words co-occur with other words. That's old news. But this is very, very important. Then by looking at the context, the contextual information of scarlet fever and scarlatina, we find that they have similarities, so we compare them. So because they have all these different, similar, they occur in similar, they hang around with the same friends, I would say, word friends, if it's a good thing or not. But that's how we basically, very simply, we do that type of thing. So we see that scarlet fever, scarlatina is very highly ranked basically with scarlet fever, and you have other words as well. So doing that technical is I want to show you how all these components are going together. We can now make suggestions of what is a related term through the historical. It's basically not so difficult because you really work similarity measures, and because in similarities they've been around for many years, nothing new. But it's how you put them together to actually do that. So now I'm going to show you the system, and I'll finish my talk. So this is the demo we have developed. So it's basically you start with a query, I said the query builder. So to start, then you start refining it. So initially you have all the documents, and once you just, you say, okay, I want to start a query. You have, I don't know what you see here. Okay, that's the query builder. So you say, okay, the next part is you can choose from a term, from an entity, an event. Those are the semantic metadata we have automatically derived from these archives to allow you to do search. But at the same time, you have the other metadata that are in the documents, the publication date and the authors and titles and so on. So first query, the user can refine the search, basically, as I said, using different criteria. And here I start asking specific term. And my term, as an example here, is pulmonary consumption. So you have pulmonary consumption, and then you say, okay, I'd like to define further the query. So if you, next step, you have now automatically, you see the the terminological variability. Basically shows you how the word what was the question I asked? I don't remember. A pulmonary consumption can occur throughout time. So, but what you also have here, you can see that you have different other related terms with to this specific initial query. So the system recommends related terms. And in this case, I might, for instance, choose, and you can see also the frequency, something which is related. So now you're adding another term which is related to your query. And in this case, you have related to this. I changed pulmonary tuberculosis. And now you see you have two types of terms. Pulmonary tuberculosis is also added to the query builder, like the pulmonary consumption. And at the same time, you see that in your panel, you see how those terms are occurring through time. Okay. So by clicking basically, as you see on the related terms box, you can see the term can be added to the query, and the documents also in the related terms are updated as well, because in this case you added another, so you have a different view. So you have more documents or less documents according to your query. So this is basically the components, the composite time graph is automatically updated. Terms related to pulmonary consumption and pulmonary tuberculosis. And then you can actually do refine your search and look at other metadata, refine the documents by the date published. So in this case, we want to find documents till, say, 1950. So only the documents published up to 1950. And you have much less documents than the whole collection. But you also might refine them further, basically the documents, by looking at other types of semantic analysis. So here we want to look at entities. And you have, as you remember, we focused on anatomical entities, biological entities, environment, sign, symptom, subject, and therapeutical investigation. So now I can semantically refine the documents according to the types that I'm interested. Say, for instance, I want to go into environment. And if I click into environment, automatically the system suggests all the words which are under environment. So now you can click at the ones which are suggested, because the system, we know they exist. And you have, for instance, you can click at something or a country or town. And then you now, every time you are searching, you are looking, picking up an entity or an event, you have less documents, but they're refined because interactively you choose the types of semantic entities or related terms or basically publication year. So here you have, as you see on the query builder, you have two terms, pulmonary consumption and pulmonary tuberculosis. You're looking up to 1950. And you're also looking out of this document collection at the name entity, environment, and out of this you've selected milk. So really for a historian who wants to find a different environmental conditions, a specific time for tuberculosis, you can really narrow down your search as you wish. Maybe you care about how milk was used. I mean, the different types of searches that a historian can do depending on the requirements. So you are really narrowed down, you restrict now your query builder. And then you see you have, of course, less documents, but these are reduced because they're more pertinent. You narrow down your search. And last, the next query is events. And in this case, you can still keep you can actually, if you want, you can remove some of the, in the query builder of the entities or some of your questions, or you can add. And in this case, we have, we put something on causality or affect. I don't know which one I have here. So in this case, we have only two basically events. And if I put causality, and I said in tuberculosis, so you're interested about that cause tuberculosis. So this is the type of question, a general question you can ask. And in this case, the user basically partially, you don't have to complete, partially completes the template according to the type you're interested in. So you want to know, to search for documents mentioning the cause of tuberculosis in the archives. So once you do that, you're ready to, you have the documents back, which are annotated, and this is how the document is displayed. So you have here the first part, the bibliographic information. Then you have the document content. Then you have the semantic information. So all this automatically identified per document. So the semantic information here, as you see, it's also expressed as a pie chart. And all the entities, they're highlighted in different colors. So, you know, if the document has, and the distribution as well is there. So you see if environment is more important or treatment is more important, then you start looking again, searching the text. So in this case, see that all, it's an environment. So you look at the different number of environmental entities, but also if you look at this semantic entities and events, it's like a semantic fingerprint of a document. So if you're a historian, you're looking, you look at the types of entities co-occurring. So if you're looking at milk, each document has specific types and instances associated. So you're characterizing semantically the whole document. It gives you ideas about people in the 1950s who talk about that. They also talked about other things as well. So it's like a semantic fingerprinting of document, which comes automatically. Then you have here the entities, as I said, instances in the document, which I cannot see here, it's too small. And then they're highlighted as well in the document. So you click the specific part, you find the highlights in the document. And the same is also for events. Find cases where specific causes of tuberculosis are mentioned in the document. And that's the same thing, they're highlighted. So you identify causality events automatically. So affect events also allows to explore if therapeutic measures have a positive or negative effect. So that's the search system. Apologies, I was struggling because I couldn't see it here, it's too small. My talk, we're really continuing working on adding different entity types, more geographical locations. So the corpus that we have developed will be made publicly available for folk who would like to build on that. I very much hope that will be the case. But we're expanding, we're adding more entities. So it was our historians that were really keen on geographical locations, organizations, tools and materials. We're very much guided by what users want. And again, if you want to contribute to the corpus and add more entities, we'll be very happy to hear from you. We also have an infrastructure which allows people to basically look at the annotations which happen automatically, crowdsourcing and make corrections. So if that's something of interest, we're very happy to hear you. And again, this type of gold standards are very types of the community because people want to make enrichments in a completely different way. They can look at the corpus collection from different perspectives. The same BMJ, you can look at from clinical, from civilian part, for different diseases. So those event types and those entities, again, are indications rather than, you know, our own interest, but we'll be very happy to discuss with other people about expansions. Another things as well is about the discourse interpretation, which I mentioned briefly. We did it for Europe and Med Central, but we very much like to add it into our corpus and our system. So as a conclusion, I'd like to say that again, some other things we are adding is we can add topic analysis and other things. But what I try to show is how we can enrich data, you know, archives, medical archives, to support historians of medicine in this case, to do better search and to explore the collections in different ways. So of course we can think about linking different archives together and finding associations, which are very difficult to do if you're just doing keywords. And one of the things we're doing is by basically creating a big rich annotation database to allow other people to plug in tools for text miners, but basically to support a bigger search system. But the important part to remember is here is how, hopefully, is how you can search a collection in more semantically meaningful way, how you can capture terminological variation to, again, support search and entities and events. I'll finish with saying thank you to several people. HRC for funding, of course, the BMJ and Wellcome Library for making the archives, BMJ actually for making the archives available for us to text mine, and different people who did the annotations and the work. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Questions? And then Martin.
Yeah, I guess what I would ask is does this allow us to do something that a historian with an infinite amount of time wouldn't be able to do? Because this is a criticism that we often hear in digital humanities is, well, if you'd just given me 6 years off of my work so that I could go and do that, I would have been able to find the same thing. So is there anything fundamentally different?
Oh, very much so. There are different fundamental things. First of all, it's impossible now to search manually. I mean, you can do, it gives you, semantic search basically gives you different, you can look at different dimensions of collections, not just one collection, but different collections. So it's absolutely impossible, actually. By that, I'm guided by our historians. I should have had my historians with me. So basically, it is impossible, absolutely impossible to do this manually. You might have several years, as you said, in place to do search manually and be able to find the same information. But we all know that using search based on text mining, you have more semantics. So you have more pertinent search. You get things from different perspectives. Keyword extraction anymore. So you don't, the point is that you don't need to have, if you don't have time, you need to find automated means to do the search.
Will people see that as being less careful or less prudent, perhaps, trusting a machine when we're used to trusting a human who's an expert?
Well, that's a good question, but it's actually, if you think about the amount of data that we have, then actually this is just only 350,000 documents. It's nothing. It's a small amount of text. But if you think of all the other collections that you have in history and from different sources, you can think about multilingual collections as well. It is impossible to draw insights by just relying on a human to draw insights from the collection by just looking these manually. What the machine does is supports the discovery. So you don't eliminate the human, but you make the life of the human easier. And that's the important part. So you are, we're doing, in a sense, all the linking and the dirty work to find the associations. And it's up to the human to do the interpretation. So I don't do the interpretation, but I present information. You rank the types of evidence to the user. You can customize. Again, that's an important part because very often you have users, so if you have the same collection, our historians, they care about lung disease, but somebody might care about infectious diseases. So they want to look at, they might want to look at the documents from different perspectives. And so the types of entities and events, or they might want to see geographical locations. So add components to support people in their search. And this you can do only by adding basically the semantic tools, which are very mature right now, to be able to support. So it is a matter of allowing users to do better their job, really.
Martin?
We've been working on the MOH reports, and so I just really wanted to learn a bit more about what stage you're at, because this sounds really exciting and a great opportunity, which was the further analysis of those. From what you're saying, it looks as though you sort of come in with disease etiology, and it's all about nomenclature, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, and so on. But with the MOH reports, these are really sort of political, administrative documents. And I just wonder, sort of first question, how many of the effects will capture things like surveillance or notification or isolation, the kind of things that interest us as public health historians, or is that sort of the next step?
It's actually a good question, because for the MOH we mined only 5,500 reports. It's a small, very small collection, this one. So exactly your question is very important. So you mentioned about the public health. So this it depends really. You can expand. You can add more archives to look at the public health dimension. I think I mentioned at the beginning of my slides that you can look at different dimensions. You can add other reports. I just talked about the MOH, which is a small amount, 5,000, but they're capturing they have different topics. So it's basically, as you said, public health. So you can look at the different, we try to do that, we mind that, but again, from the perspective of the people who were working on lung diseases. But we can add and enrich that to find more perspectives and dimensions from public health. And it is easy to do that if you have platforms and infrastructure to add more component. You might say, I want a different type of entity. I want different event that we're adding and we're enriching basically the search system. And I very much like to hear more about that, because we work with Public Health England as well, a different project, more contemporary. So that's very interesting for us to look at the historical perspective.
With the MOH reports, and this is relevant too to the present with public health back in local government, what's striking us is both the sort of generic features of what are in them, but also the difference between places. And with London, which is what we're talking about, the Wellcome collection, there are huge variations with wealth, with political makeup, the sort of electoral context, and the sort of choices that are being made about public health spending and things like that. So I suppose what I'm wondering is, does your interface at the moment allow the researcher to select, let's say, a group of metropolitan boroughs to compare the texts that they generate with another group?
We haven't done that, the geographical yet. No, this is one of the things we wanted. I skimmed through that. You can select between BMJ and MOH if you want to just search one collection or the other. But what you just said, this is something we plan to do, we want to do. So our historians also, so we defined in the beginning, we had, again, it was a small project, so we had to make a decision about which entities we start, but this is exactly something that we could very easily add. Yeah.
I have a question, but I also have one from the live stream, so I'll ask that one first. Graham Steele asks, can we play with these NaCTeM tools anytime soon?
The search system. Okay, that's a very good question. I need to, the content we have, it's BMJ, and that's, it belongs to BMJ. So I don't know, I have to ask, basically, I don't know to what extent I have to ask permission if this is open. The MOH is open, but the BMJ is not. So the search tool. Yeah, but basically, yes, so very much. This is something that I have to negotiate. It's not my content to give.
I have a question as well, which is totally different, which is.
Hang on, just a moment. I'll just. But there are other tools which are open, which are very close, similar, and I'm very happy to point them to you. It's on our website. Most of our services are open, as long as it depends on the content. If the content is open, the search tools are open. If the content is proprietary, we have some constraints. But there are several tools on our website which are open, and you can have a look to understand how actually those search tools name entities. For instance, for name entities, you can look at the Clio system, K-L-E-I-O, which does some faceted semantic search. It's very close to that, but doesn't do events. And you can also look at Europamed Central, which is open.
So it's a classic case then of constrained by the content of the technology, which is always a way with that.
It's a different, yeah. I mean, this is something perhaps we could discuss about this, but it's not. I mean, this specific system, the search system, is not open yet. But let's. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a totally different question, which relates to the question about different types of content and things that aren't. I can't remember the particular thing you mentioned, but sort of other sort of wider context, which is. I was reading some of the examples you used of the kind of documents that you're using in this database, and it really struck me that the language, being medical journals, is very procedural and doesn't resemble anything that I've done anything sort of vaguely similar to before. And I was just curious whether you felt that these types of documents were particularly amenable to these types of approaches, because particularly when you're talking about negatives and positives in context, the way that medical journals are written can be quite structured. And I guess there's an interesting piece in there as well about the further you're going back, you're actually finding that our medical journals less structured, for example, it's formal in their language and providing, and if you're encountering different problems with trying to use sort of the semantic analysis.
Well, that's a good question. So we didn't currently for the types of events and entities, we just discussed historically, but if I understand you correctly, you talked about how we negate the interpretation. Now, the interpretation, we have done it for the contemporary documents, so especially for biomedical. That's why I showed the Europamed Central. But we haven't done for the historical ones, and we want to do it. So we want to see to what extent, and that's actually a very, very nice observation, to what extent the way we are talking about an event being certain or uncertain changes over time diachronically. That's a very interesting research question. And it's something to do. So we haven't done it yet because we ran out of time. But it's actually, we looked at the types of interpretation from synchronically between different types of documents. So if you have, say, biomedical or news or historical, that's one perspective. The other perspective is to look at to what extent the interpretation changes diachronically. And that's something I would very much like to do and compare.
Any other questions? Is there any other online?
There's nothing I don't.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, sorry. It's a totally different one, which is about the methodology that underpins the search interface, or at least the user experience, to use that kind of phrase. It seems to me like it was very much driven by an assumption, and I'm not saying it's an untested assumption, but an assumption that what a researcher wants is to gradually narrow their search. And they want to gradually get nearer something. And I'm not denying that's a lot of what researchers do, but I guess it almost behoves us at some point to make sure they don't get stuck in that kind of thing. And I'm guessing you haven't done that, because I was looking at the left-hand side, the ability to get rid of
you can, indeed.
Very easily kind of drive you back to things you hadn't found.
Indeed.
But it's just interesting, you told the story in a very, we have gradually narrowed.
Well, that was one narrative, you're right. I mean, my story wasn't narrowing down, but you can have a entirely different story where you widen it, or basically where you eliminate if you think it's too narrow, it narrows down a lot your search. I tend to also when I demonstrate systems, I like to narrow down, because I have so much information I want to find to narrow down the search. But this is not always. It depends a lot on the users and the requirements. It's very important to allow the user to broaden or narrow the search as they want. So this was actually my interpretation of a demonstration. So.
Some of the text analytics programs I've seen draw very interesting concept maps with your main entities and then little networks coming off them related to the effects and other sort of relational aspects. And this could bring in things that you haven't classified already, but which you can see, which you haven't expected, which is really what this question is getting at. So does your interface allow that sort of thing?
Well, the interface, the demo showed, can be expanded in whichever way. What you saw was an annotation tool we have developed in collaboration with other people. It's called BRAT. And sorry for the name. The annotation tool is just actually a visualization of those semantic notations. So it's actually, the tool per se can accommodate any type of annotation of different event types. It's just an instance, a snapshot of the specific case here. This is a different type. It's an annotation tool. It's nothing to do with the infrastructure, but it can be part of the infrastructure to show to a user how text mining tools automatically annotate. It helps to visualize the semantic types in such a way. So otherwise you will have like tables, and it's very, you want to have a more visual, pleasant way to see these semantic annotations. It's a slightly different thing. Yes, because it can accommodate absolutely everything, events. We used it, and I know people are using it a lot for different applications. So if you're interested in that, I can point you to the web page and how to use it as well.
So just a couple of questions. One, well, we've got a number of Adam students here, and I was just wondering, is one of your tools there, like Clio, for example, something where students could go and just play with to get a sense of what text mining is about and everything? And if there is one, which one would you recommend?
Okay, there are several. If you go on our website, NaCTeM, it's at NaCTeM website, and you look under services, there are a set of services which are open, and they're mostly, so there is the easiest one. It's called Termine. And Termine automatically extracts terms. You can use anything. You can put newspaper, news, anything. So you see then automatically extracts concepts, terms, and ranks them. So Termine mines terms. Then the second tool service we have there is based on Medline, so it's abstracts. Most of them are on abstracts because they're open, so we don't have any constraints. Is the Clio system, which actually does faceted semantic search based on name entities. And then you can see how you can look at different facets, narrow or widen the search. I have other systems like clinical trials development. So this is actually allows you to do search on clinical terms, but mesh terms, ontologies, and also produces automatically eligibility criteria for people who work on clinical. Another system which is called Facta Plus, and has also a visualizer. This one actually gives you, is like a vector. So it gives you direct and indirect associations based on concepts. So the whole thing is that you want to know what occurs with what, but also you have the unknown, the hidden, with the hypothesis being that if I know A occurs with B and B with C, then most probably A has a connection with C. And the indirect association mining, as we call it, people to just think about hidden information, so it's implicit information. This has a very nice visualizer as well, so you can see immediately the indirect interactions between different concepts. It's the EuropaMed Central, which is the evidence finder as well. And we have
Well, there's lots there. There's lots for
I know,
the
and that, yeah, there are different tools for different and different other, but basically those are the main ones. And I guess for acronyms, for variability, Acromine. Acromine is basically, if you, because we have lots of acronyms in biomedicine, if you put something like ER, you don't know what's the expansion, how it's expanded. So it actually automatically expands different. It's like a big dictionary, but it gives you automatically expands the acronyms. And this one, of course, I really very much want to make it live. Perhaps we can do it for new content, which is open. So,
any other questions at this? I've got. There isn't any other online, is there, James? Just which you may not be able to answer, and maybe it's not that. But I know you are historians at Manchester, and they had kind of come to you with sort of a eureka moment, whether there was anything that they got excited about.
Actually, I would very much wish that our collaborators, Elizabeth and Karsten and Mike would be here. Especially Elizabeth, I have to say, she has been extremely excited as an historian about the things she said she discovered. I cannot, she's the best person to answer this question. So I'm just taking much more inspiration from how excited she is by looking at search and using this tool. So I think yes, I don't know how to what extent the degree of the eureka, but I think she finds it extremely useful, and I'm pretty sure that she sees. When actually she was presenting her system, she could see at facets I couldn't historian. And she could look at the different perspectives of the tool, which I look at it, as you said before, you're narrowing down because I'm just looking at one way. But herself, as a historian, she was looking at the system, at the semantic entities. I was influenced by her saying, oh, I'm looking at the semantic fingerprint of the document, which I didn't see it like. I also look at the entities, which is by looking at this entity, what other entities are there and what that means for me.
And presumably how they've changed over time.
Yeah.
That's
basically, yeah. So it's up to,
last question, anyone?
Yeah, I would like to ask you how this kind of fits in with the artificial intelligence and making computers that can think like we do. Are you creating a machine that's thinking the way that a human brain would process language? Quite different. Based in linguistics.
Yeah, it is. It's very much based on because the extracting events and extracting. It's not basically this type of methods are natural language processing based text mining as opposed to text. So we do very much analyze text. We're using, when I said and I mentioned event mine, we parse the text. We use deep parsers. We didn't extract semantic representation. So it has deep analytics behind. If that is really AI, that's a very tough question. I see it is a way towards basically, if you're extracting association, quite statistical. It's still quite a way to supporting the human. If it's a fully automatic system, from beginning to the automatic system, but how humans interpret it make the whole difference. I don't know if that answers your question. So not, and to take a step further, projects where you have much more of a deeper interpretation, or you can understand this type of text mining basically is how to categorize and rank different results to more AI components like robots. But that's the next step. We don't do that. We're not core area AI.
You go about the linguistics isn't really the same way that our brain works, I guess, is it?
It is, because how you are actually, it depends how you're analyzing documents and how you're analyzing what kind of analytics you have behind. The understanding is that, but if your question is this is emulate the human? Is this human thinking? Up to a small degree, hopefully, yes.
And I suppose on that note, we should thank Sophia for a very interesting and stimulating talk. Thank you. I should say, sorry, one last little thing. Our next seminar is now in the summer semester, so is on the 12th of May, and it's Susan Rennie from Glasgow talking about a pilot historical thesaurus of Scots. So looking at the Scottish language and how it's changed historically over time. Hopefully see you there.